Afternoon. I hope you're having a beautiful afternoon. And we're going to be starting this episode of the podcast in a couple of minutes. We're doing another episode which is kind of off kilt from our normal podcast schedule, but that's all good. The timing allows for it. I think that it's a good time to be doing it. We're coming to the end of the Australian afternoon. We're waking up to this in the UK, so hopefully this podcast is very beneficial. And we're going to be talking about Fat Loss 101. What's a good idea? What should we expect? How's the best way to proceed? So if you're coming to this one live, guys, let us know in the comments that you're here. If you watch this one on replay, just get into the comments there and hashtag replay. Let us know that you've been in here. We're going to be starting this episode in 2 minutes, guys. So how's the day been? We've got a bit of an update going into today, which is day 10. After day 9, we were Warriors 5, Wolves 4, so slight advantage. The girls were looking good yesterday, potentially a big lead opening up, but the boys clawed it back with what was a really good coaching call. So well done, boys. Well done, Wolves, howling back to the kind of just behind, but well done, Warriors, holding their lead. So what's going on, guys? I hope you've had a beautiful start to your day so far. It obviously is coming to an end for our Aussies and for our Brits. And the Europeans just waking up to this one. Now, it looks like for some reason I'm not going to get my comments displaying here, so I have no idea what that is. So if you have said hi, I do appreciate you. Hopefully this podcast holds up. I just want to remind you guys that I am in Bali at the moment. The internet is notoriously shit. So if this does in any way just chop out, I will re-record the podcast and pop it in here later on. We're going to get started in 1 minute, guys, letting a few extra crew coming in to get their feast. So we're going to be talking about speed of weight loss during this podcast. And I think this is going to be pretty topical given that we've just finished our check-ins for the week in both the challenge and our client group. So we're going to be kicking start this in just 20 seconds. I'm just going to make sure that everything is as I expect with the live because I can't see the comments here at the moment. So going over to the free group. Hey Kylie, hey Joe, hey Burns, hey Tez. I hope you guys are good. So guys, I think we are ready to rocking roll. So I can't see your comments. So if you are in here, welcome to the podcast. We're going to get started on the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back to the Better Body Academy podcast. This is the podcast that you come to when you are sick of the dumb diets and unsustainable workout programs. And if you haven't worked this out already, we actually have a very highly rated transcription of this podcast into the audio version on both Spotify and Apple, for that matter, Amazon, or wherever you normally listen to podcasts. You just search the Better Body Academy podcast and you can listen to around 250 episodes of this podcast. Now let's get straight to the juice. What I want to talk about is 7 reasons why fast weight loss is a bad idea. And this is perhaps contradictory to everything that you've maybe thought of before. So I want to go through last week's check-ins, and I'm going to talk more generally rather than going into specifics. There were some super impressive results from an absolute perspective. And what I mean as an absolute perspective is when you look at a list of check-ins, like there were some super great results. People losing 1 kilo, people losing 5 kilos, like pretty impressive stuff. But then I noticed some people saying things like, I only lost 3.5 kilos this week. Now, I didn't bring it across to Lombok because it was extra weight in my bag, but I carry with me a big wad of fat if you've seen that. And if I could show you what 3.5 kilos of fat looks like, it is a large amount of body weight. So when someone says I've only lost 3.5 kilograms, I think they've got a warped idea. It's kind of like when people say, I want to put on 10 kilos of muscle in the next year. Okay, so have a think about this as an analogy. take your 250 gram sirloin steak that you get at the pub or at your local grocer, okay? It's about that big, all right? Or maybe as long as my head. And I want you to think about how many 250 gram sirloin steaks go into a kilo. 4. Okay, so if you were to put on 10 kilos of muscle mass, I want you to think of that like adding 40 sirloin steaks of muscle on your body. So I'm going to put one here on my shoulder, I'm going to put one here on my shoulder, one here on my trap, one here on my trap, slash 2 each across my chest. Well, that's what, 8? I've still got another 32 sirloin steaks to put on me. Like, I'm going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And people just have this distorted image of what a kilo of fat and a kilo of muscle looks like when we take it on or put it off the body. So I just wanted to note that at the start. I love seeing big results, but I also think that they need to be in the context of a good discussion like we're going to have here. So the first thing I want to do is explain how weight is lost with an analogy. I want you to think of weight loss almost like petrol in a car. We're going to be talking about calories here. You need to get from point A to point B in your day. And let's say that using the car analogy, the separation between point A and point B is, say, 600 kilometers. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Let's not complicate it. Point A to point B is 600 kilometers, and you need to drive that in your car, and that represents your day. Now, let's say that your car could drive 550 kilometers of that 600 kilometers on a full tank of petrol. What does that mean? Well, that means that at the 550 kilometer mark, you're going to run out of petrol, right? Now, in our bodies, we call that running out of petrol a calorie deficit. It just simply means that the amount of fuel that we need for the day to stay alive and do the things that we do is more than the amount of fuel that we're putting in the petrol tank in the way of food and drinks. Does that make sense? So that's what a calorie deficit actually is. Now, in the car example, if you've run out of petrol, what do? You go to the petrol station and fill it up. But when it comes to fat loss, what we actually want is to run out of petrol. And what we want to do is, rather than fill it up immediately with more fuel or food, we want to tell the body to instead go to its backup petrol tank to get us through that last 50 kilometers. Notice that we only want to run out of petrol with a little bit of time to go. In this case, 50 kilometers. What we don't want to be doing is half filling the petrol tank and running out of petrol halfway through our trip. We'll talk about why soon, but what we don't want to be doing is chopping our calories to half of what our daily requirement is, because it's going to come with some massive consequences. We're going to talk about them in this podcast. Okay, so when weight is lost in the initial stages, I want to talk about what that weight is. Firstly, a good amount of the weight that you lose in the initial stages will be fat. And part of the reason is because the body, you're changing what your behaviors are quite suddenly. And the body thinks, well, this is great. If I have an excess of this fat, I want to give a bit of it up because it's a hindrance. It's actually costing me energy. It's making me burn more calories, carrying around this extra fat. I want you to think about, in the same example that we talked about, if we were driving that 600 kilometers with a caravan on the back, that extra weight means we're going to burn more petrol. So the car would prefer for us not to have that extra weight on the back. Same as in the initial stages of weight loss, your body would prefer you don't have that extra weight, not on the back, but on the love handles, on the bum, on the belly. So at the start, you will lose quite a substantial amount of fat. Also, a good amount of that fat will also be water weight. And I think people always say, oh yeah, but lots of it is water. but they don't actually know why it's water. So let me tell you the main reason why people lose a lot of water at the start of their journey. The big reason is most people consume a hell of a lot of refined processed foods. Refined processed foods are typically high in refined sugars or carbohydrates. Now, when we store carbohydrates in our muscles and our liver, carbohydrates work like a sponge, and so they suck up a lot of fluid. So if you are well fed, let's say, you're going to have a lot of water in your cells clinging to the carbohydrate like a sponge would cling to the water in a sink. Now, when you join Better Body Academy, what we typically do is change you from having a very highly refined diet to a very unprocessed food diet. This naturally means that you're not storing as much carbohydrate. So what do you think happens? When the carbohydrate leaves, so does a lot of the water. Okay? So this is the reason why in the initial stages, you are going to see a pretty substantial reduction in the first 2 to 3 weeks, which constitutes a lot of water, a good amount of fat, and depending on the way that you're going about this, potentially muscle loss. Now, fat loss is what we want. Water, well, doesn't really matter too much. As long as we're hydrated, that's okay. But what we don't want to happen is to lose muscle. And we're going to talk about the reason that this is a very bad idea very soon. Let's talk about what is considered safe weight loss. For most people, you should be aiming for 0.5 to a kilo per week. That's considered safe. That doesn't mean that if you're not hitting that, you're not doing well. That means that's probably the upper limits of what's considered safe. Now, we're talking when we're in the middle of our journey. It's obviously going to be a little bit higher at the start for a lot of people. But to be losing 5 kilos per week on a constant basis, think about that. That would be a threat to your life. So that is not considered safe. So for most people, somewhere in the vicinity of an average, let's say that you were, say, 10 weeks into a program, if you followed the plan and you'd lost somewhere between 5 and 10 kilos over 10 weeks, that would be considered pretty good and sustainable. There's also a big difference between men and women. Generally speaking, men have a natural higher muscle mass than women. And this will mean that men will typically burn more calories doing the exact same thing than women, and therefore will lose weight quicker than women. So if you are in the challenge, or if you're a client, or if you're just listening to this podcast and you are comparing your journey with your partner's and getting frustrated or even pumped that you're doing better than him or her or less or whatever, you should really consider just thinking about yourself, because everyone's journey is different based on gender, age, what they're doing, their amount of muscle mass, the list goes on. So I think it's really important to say run your own race here. But what I do want to talk about now is the 7 reasons why fast weight loss is not good weight loss, in my opinion, as a general statement. Now, what I will say is the exception to this is if you have a lot of weight to lose. What I'm talking is, 40, 50, 60 kilos or more at the start, it would be good to see a good amount of that weight come off fairly quickly. But beyond that, for the most part, we want to be in that safe range. So the first reason of the 7 is that big, quick changes are obviously less sustainable. Now, I've spoken to a number of you during the course of this challenge via the Success Team, and one of the things that I want you to note is that a challenge that we are running here is about creating hype and energy. But that shouldn't be confused with what it takes to transform long term, which is a transformation of your lifestyle habits, what you're doing on a daily basis. So whilst you get excited during this challenge and you're making some big changes, some may think that it's necessary to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater, but in reality, that's not the case. I often think that the thing that causes most people to fall off quickly is when they change too much too quickly. If you've gone from being completely loose on your nutrition and sitting on a couch, then you don't actually need to change that much to cause some initial fat loss. So I'd like you to think about, and I've often asked our clients this, what do you think your calorie intake was before you come into Better Body Academy? And let's say it's easily 3,000 or 4,000 calories a day. Well, look, when you come in and we put you on a modest meal plan, you're going to lose fat quickly because of the fact that what you were doing before was probably not that great from an absolute calorie perspective. Does this make sense? So actually, a great approach, a sustainable approach, is to think, rather than just stop doing everything that I used to do, how can I make some substitutions so it doesn't feel as crazy? As an example, let's say that you have a lot of fish and chips. I'm not going to say stop eating the fish and chips. What I'm going to say is that there is a better way to have the fish and chips. You can even do it fried if you want, but rather than having them as battered fish and chips from a takeaway store, you make the fish at home, you fry it still with a crumb, for example, and maybe you have your fries air fried. So you're still having your fish and chips, but it's not so much of a change that it's overwhelming. Another great example of this is, let's say that you love a beer and you're used to drinking 40, 50 beers a week. Now that sounds like a ridiculous number to a lot of people, but one of my greatest ever clients, he was drinking 40 to 50 beers a week and he's lost now about 20 kilograms. And the predominant way that he's done that is by cutting his beer intake down to 20 beers a week and swapping it to low-calorie beers. So he hasn't just gone completely cold turkey. He's done some substitutions. That's helped him to do something that's more sustainable. And I'm always going to be the coach that's going to talk to you about sustainability, not whether you're a good boy or a good girl, because that just doesn't work. So the first thing is to understand that smaller, sustainable changes are better. Number 2, slower weight loss is better for your overall muscle preservation. Guys, when you lose the weight, you do not want to be a skinny bag of bones. Okay? You want composition. And I want you to imagine it like this. Let's pretend you've got a mandarin or an orange. The skin is representative of the fat. If we take that skin off with a fat loss program, underneath, are you going to have a shriveled up nothingness of composition? What's going to be under there is going to be muscle or not. And I can tell you for a fact that you're going to want to have some muscle still there when that fat comes off. There is a reason for that. Muscle has so many benefits that are proven. Increases in strength and stability. Metabolism, which we're going to talk about in a moment. The actual fact that you will fill your clothes out and look good rather than them hanging off you. In fact, muscle has been shown to be anti-cancer in its benefits. They know this because they've done a very large study with bodybuilders. And even with all of the toxicity that they put into their body via way of steroids, bodybuilders, generally speaking, don't die of cancer at rates that are the same as normal people. Even despite the toxicity of all the steroids, they die of heart attacks. And this is because of the fact that muscle has been proven to have anti-cancer benefits. You are going to lose muscle as you age. This happens. It's a process I'm not going to talk about here, but there's a name for it. It's called sarcopenia, which means age-related muscle loss. Some of you may be seeing that already. In fact, most of you will be seeing that already. And anything that you do to accelerate that muscle loss is not a good idea. Losing weight quickly accelerates muscle loss. The reason is because when you enter that calorie deficit, when you run out of petrol, if you're only filling your car up half a tank, meaning 300 of the 600 kilometers, and your body's sitting there going, well, where do you want me to get the rest of the petrol from? The body is going to say, well, I don't want to lose all my fat stores because that's a backup source. So it's going to break down a lot of muscle and turn that into calories to fuel the process. And to those of you that didn't know that can happen, that is extremely common in very low calorie diets. You break down muscle to fuel the calorie deficit. And it ends up having future problems, which we're going to talk about in a second. So again, smaller calorie deficits, smaller, slower, sustainable changes are more muscle preserving than big, quick cuts. Number 3, slower weight loss leads to a lesser drop in our metabolism. When the body senses that there is a threat to survival, we have to understand that the brain's only goal, the only goal of the brain, the highest priority is to keep you alive. So if the brain senses that you're threatening its survival by putting it under a massive calorie restriction, it's going to say, all right, okay, Jackie or James is putting me under threat to survival here. I'm going to put the brakes on anything that burns calories unnecessary. You'll lose all your energy. You'll feel very tired and fatigued all the time. You'll have zero sexuality. Like you will not feel that at all. And most importantly, your metabolism will slow right down. And so what's going to happen here is when your metabolism slows right down, as a consequence of the metabolism slowing down, you're burning less calories to try to compensate for the fact that you're taking in less calories. This is your body fighting back. And people say, well, my metabolism's broken. No, it's not. The reason you go through weight loss plateaus is your body fighting back to keep you alive. That's your metabolism doing its thing properly. It's not broken. It's a sign that it's working. If you kept losing weight in an exponential manner, that would be your metabolism being broken, because the end result of that is that you die of malnutrition. Okay? Your metabolism is not broken. What's happening here is when you go through fat loss plateaus, that's your body trying to stop you from losing more weight. It cares more about keeping you alive than how you look in the mirror. And so, the goal here is to, if you think about it, this is the reason why, biggest loser contestants have been shown to nearly always gain the weight back, because their metabolism becomes so damaged by the fast fat loss. So whilst your metabolism isn't broken initially, if you keep with these same quick fix strategies, it becomes a permanent problem. Anyone that's done a lifetime of diets will understand exactly how hard it is now to lose weight. Anyone that has any kind of bariatric surgery, like gastric surgeries, knows exactly how hard it is to lose the weight once you've put it back on. And that's because in those two cases, what's happened is there is long-term damage to the metabolism. The way that you can stop this is slow, sustainable approach. Number 4, big drops in weight inevitably lead to decreased mental and emotional well-being. Let's say that you lost 10 kilograms in 3 weeks. You may come to think that you're going to lose 10 kilograms in the next 3 weeks. I've explained to you some pretty good reasons here why that is very unlikely to happen and also not a good thing. We get really anxious when expectation doesn't meet reality. That can be really hard, right? When we think something's going to happen and it doesn't happen. So you lost 10 kilograms in 3 weeks. You didn't lose 10 kilograms in the next 3 weeks. That's completely reasonable to not happen and it shouldn't happen. But you think that you're doing something wrong as a consequence. And now you've made an already emotional weight loss journey even more challenging emotionally. Weight loss is not going to happen in a linear manner from A to B. It doesn't work like that. I could go into details here, but it would get complicated. But for most people, weight loss is going to go through many ups and downs, not because they're doing the wrong thing, but we're going to have to move your calories up and down to try to navigate your metabolism kicking back. And this is where most people struggle without a coach. Suffice to say that slower weight loss that's consistent is much better for the mind and the emotions. I'm just going to make a note on number 5 is that rapid weight loss can impact your hormonal health massively. Massively. What does that actually mean? People throw around this term hormones, but what does that actually mean? The balance of your hormones. Hormones like your sex hormone, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and then of course other hormones like the hunger hormones, ghrelin, insulin, cortisol, the stress hormone. These are all hormones. All of these hormones, most of these hormones are made from fat, as in dietary fat. So if part of a massive calorie restriction, you decide to cut out a lot of your fat, what's going to happen here is you're interrupting the production of those hormones. Or if you are overtraining or undersleeping or overstressing, it's not the production issue that's going to be the problem, it's the functioning issue that's going to be the problem. Guys might notice a complete flatline in their energy and sexuality associated with a drop in testosterone. Ladies might notice some real up and downs in emotions, and in extreme cases, a disappearance of the period for premenopausal women. And this is obviously to do with the interruption of the sex hormones. Again, if we're not taking such an aggressive approach to fat loss, this is a lesser chance of happening. Final 2, slower weight loss, generally speaking, leads to better skin elasticity. Now, while skin naturally loses elasticity as we age, very quick reduction in body fat and the underlying muscle underneath the skin is going to mean that the skin is going from stretched to unstretched. And that reduction quickly means that it's losing its elasticity. So what we want to think about is gradual weight loss, giving the skin time to naturally reduce and adapt. Number 7, and the final one for today, is that, and this is something that probably most people won't put value on, unless of course you're in Better Body Academy and you've come to understand this during your journey over the last couple of years. And it's that slower weight loss gives more time for education. If a person only cares about weight loss and not long-term maintenance, then the risk of relapse to where they were before is very high. There's plenty of research that's shown this. People that lose weight quickly tend to regain weight quickly because they've done it in unsustainable manners, plus all of the things that I've listed above. This is mostly because a person has not understood these above points. People are in such a rush, coming from a place of desperation, trying to escape the pain of being heavy and feeling, I don't want to feel like this anymore, so I'll do anything to solve it. I'll take all the pills and all the drugs and everything that I can to get rid of this fat. And this is actually what keeps them on the hamster wheel for the long period. When weight loss happens gradually, and it's happening at the same time that the person is educating themselves on the fundamentals of long-term weight management, the person not only gets the result in a sustainable way, but becomes equipped and empowered with the tools to do this for themselves for the long term. And for me, actually, this is the most important part. I see that inside Better Body Academy, and I just love when our clients start to quote back things that I or one of the other coaches have said. This is because there's been a transference of education and information from one brain to another. And what I love most about this idea is that the client is then empowered to then transfer the information that they've learned on to their family circle, to their friend circle. And this is seen when I see, mums and dads out there that have kids exercising with them. I see partners that are influencing their partners to do the same thing. This can only happen where there's a transfer of education. And this just takes time. You can't take on everything all at once and expect to get the whole experience. So guys, I'm going to say that this is a pretty wholesome podcast. At the end of the day, what you do doesn't really matter in my life. I'm only here to give you the best advice. And the hardest thing is that some people will just listen to this podcast or they'll turn it off halfway because it's not what they want to hear. What they want to hear is, what they're searching for on Google and YouTube is, how the fuck do I get this off as quick as possible? And that in itself, for me, is the stem of the problem. Because to do anything quick in life, you got to take shortcuts. The best example I can think of in this moment is when you build a house quickly and cheaply, you erect it. And I'm thinking of this house that I'm living in right here in Indonesia right now. From the outside, it looks absolutely beautiful. But if I start to inspect, there's cracks, there's things missing, there's things that are just hinged. And from the outside, it looks great. But you just know that the quality of the job is not there and it's not going to last very long at all. And I have the same desire to just say to people, you know what, just slow it down and play a long game. If we can take a year to two to get you to where you want to be, you're never going to go back. And so the person that's yo-yoing through this might take 20 years to get to where they want to go because they keep trying to do it in these quick fix fashions. But if you can realize that the shortcut is the long cut and you dedicate 6 months to 12 months to a year to 2 years to this project of you becoming a healthy person, this is long lasting. This is not going anywhere. So I'm going to leave it on that note. Hopefully this has been helpful. If there's any questions, throw them through or pop them on the wall, guys. This has been the Better Body Academy podcast coming to you this time in the afternoon. I hope it's been helpful and we'll see you guys in the next episode.